So, hello everyone, welcome to the Road to Exams. And today we are looking at the source-based question edition, and we're looking at how to unpack, compare, and contrast questions. Okay, so before we begin, let us focus so that the time spent would be meaningful for everyone. Okay, so let's unpack what is compare and contrast skills. So it is a skill that requires a comparison between two given sources. There is a main criteria between the two sources, and I think a lot of students have problem and has issue in looking at the common criteria between the sources. Now, comparison can come by comparing sources through these three things. First is content to content matching. That means you look at the source itself and you try to find the source details, the key ideas or the keywords that will match. Sometimes there is also the element of purpose for the two sources that are either similar or different, as well as the tone of source. Now, of course, because we are comparing, the use of connecting words is important. So if we're talking about similar, then definitely an example would be source A is similar because, and source B is also similar because of a reason. Same thing when we talk about differences. Source A is different because, all right, what's the common criteria? But source B contrasts with source A because of something. So I always use this example as a compare contrast starter or trigger. So I always ask, what are the similarities or differences between Superman and Batman? All right, what's the criteria to compare? And most of the students would actually say that, both of them are superheroes and they like to help people. Whereas the difference would be they have different origin stories. They are different in skills as well as power because Superman is like an alien and Batman is just a normal human. Okay, but these are some examples of what it means to compare two different or two contrasting content. Okay, so does compare and contrast skill, is it very common in national exams? So we're going to take a look at both 2021 Social Studies N level as well as 2021 Social Studies O level. And you can see that compare contrast can range up to 7 marks, and it is fairly common to find this question. In fact, it is a basic an expected question to be featured in the national exams. Okay, so how will it be marked? If the question is 7 marks, like what you saw in the national exam paper. Okay, so level 1 is for describing the source. Or answers only from provenance, and you can see that it actually just means that there was no criteria of matching. It's probably just a description of the source, and it's something as simple like, oh, both the sources are actually cartoons. So for that kind of answer, you will get 1 mark. Now, the green arrow, which is level 2, actually talks about false matching of evidence. False matching of evidence is there is a comparison, however, either the criteria is wrong or the evidence does not match. So these are things that you need to take note of. Now, for level 3, we are looking at similar or difference in content. Now you can see that level 3, the black hearts as well as the yellow hearts are good indicators for you to target. For a 7-mark compare contrast question, it is good to aim for at least a 5 marks. Now how will you actually get the 5 marks? It is when you are able to give two sides of similarity as well as difference in terms of content. how do you get, of course, the red hearts, which is the purpose? Okay, so sometimes some sources, because they are how similar, you end up the purpose to be also similar. However, you have to read the sources very carefully, especially if it's national exam. Sometimes, even though it is a similarity, it starts with a similarity stand, you can end up with different in purpose. Okay, and it can range from a 6 to even a 7. Now, what are the possible types of compare-contrast question? It can be worded as simply as this too. All right. Most of the time, compare and contrast questions are worded simply like this: how similar or how different. Or it can be how far does source A agree with source B. So when we talk about agree, then we are looking at similarity. Hence, the contrasting will be source A disagree with source B. Now, comparison questions ranged are usually written in 3 paragraphs, and the marks can be allocated from 6 to 7. The tip here is always to look at provenance when you unpack your sources and keywords to match the content of sources. Okay, so how do you start writing? So if the question were to ask how similar are the two sources, all right, you start with, of course, a similarity in the paragraph 1. Okay, when you look at content, so you look at sources A and B as similar in showing, of course, it's always important to state your common criteria. Now, from source A, what does it state? Okay, so from source A is always about quoting from the source. This suggests that it's really about explaining your source details. Now, because we're talking about similar in content, your connecting word can be similarly, can be and, something very simple, and, can be in addition, as long as it makes sense that you are actually looking at a content that you can find in source A as well as source B. Now, from source B, it states, again, quote, the matching source details that will match with your source A. And this suggests that, of course, you're explaining source details. And hence, both sources are similar in, this is just to sort of justify your stand. What are they similar in? All right, so later on, we can look at the samples in a bit. Now, in paragraph 2, when we look at paragraph 2, the opposite of similarity in content would be your difference in content. And from here, you can see that, sources A and B are different in showing. Again, there's a common criteria. It means there are content that is very different from the two sources. Again, quote the source, explain the source details. Now, the connecting word for different would be this contradicts, this is different. You can even write, but, source A says this, however, source B says that. It is then important that you have this connecting word so that the markers can see that, oh, I do know the difference. There are differences. I'm telling you the difference. And again, quote from source B, and this suggests that, and hence both sources are different in something. And usually we try not to copy back the common criteria. There is usually an element of difference, and students can identify that. So now for paragraph 3, right? It depends. Sometimes if the question is how similar, it could be a similarity in purpose. It could even end up to be different in purpose. You actually have to look at the source. So it is very source specific. So read the source and unpack the source very carefully. All right, and you can see, just like any other purpose question, you need to make sure that you actually have, or you identify the purpose verb, or sometimes it's called a message verb. You need to identify and be very specific about the audience. Don't give very airy-fairy identification of audience. And of course, you need the outcome. And outcome is always about action. And because this is the stand is difference in purpose, you actually need a connecting word, which is different, or this contrasts with, um, this is definitely not the same with the source, all right? And of course, what's the message? Now, the only thing is, do you need a third paragraph? Okay, do you have time to do third paragraph? Let's ask ourselves, and let's be also very realistic about it. Now, what's the realities of national exam? I've shown you the national exam papers, and of course, it comprised of 5 source-based questions. Okay, and you have an hour and 15 minutes, and this is of course considering that 30 minutes you need to spend for essay. Do you need that third paragraph? Okay, do you need to get that 6 to 7 marks? It is at the end of the day up to the individual, up to the student themselves, whether they are able to unpack sources very fast, and if they're able to do that, you have to make sure that your purpose is really written well. If not, it is really a waste of time. Our aim is to be exam smart at the end of the day. So we're going to refer to this worksheet for the next part of the video. If you don't have this worksheet, please look at the description in the video. I have given you a link and you can download this worksheet. Alright, so let's take a look at practice 1. We are looking at sources A and B, and the question is, study sources A and B. How different are the source? So obviously for paragraph 1, we will start with different in content. Paragraph 2, similar in content, to at least get us that 4 to 5 marks out of 7 marks. Now, as you are referring to source A as well as source B, always look at the provenance. Okay, so this is what I meant by provenance. The provenance is that few sentence that you have at every source actually, okay, and it's giving you clues. So always annotate the provenance. Always read very carefully. Always look out for the year. Look out for certain keywords. Ask yourself, what does it mean? And that would definitely help you. Okay, so now when we talk about difference, we're talking about, okay, what if, let's say, you give an example of, okay, both of them are different in terms of one comes from the opposition party and the other one comes from the government. So how many marks would you get? Oh, then you'll get maybe level 1, just like what we mentioned previously in the first half of the video. So do yourself a favor, okay, even though if let's say you're stuck, at least give yourself credit for identifying difference in type of source or the creator of source. At least get that 1 mark if it's possible. All right, so now we're going to take a look at difference in content. And when we talk about difference in content, we are looking at ideas or even keywords. So as you are reading the source, you can get a sensing that the source is actually quite different, right? Source A seems to be a little bit more negative, I would say, some of the words that's being used, whereas source B, which is a source adapted from a speech featured in Parliament, there seems to be a bit more positive aspect to what they were discussing. So if you look very carefully, now this particular sentence, all right, it shows that 1/3 of all healthcare costs are being subsidized and it is not enough and many are worried. Now let's find the opposite to this, where healthcare cost is not enough. Let's take a look. You can't find it quite obvious, okay, if let's say this was the identification of content, but specifically look at this. The government is going to improve, is going to support and continue to perhaps restructure how MediSave and how subsidies can be used. So you can see that subsidy here is the keyword and subsidy here is the keyword. So if you look at both these two keywords and then you see that they are actually quite different in terms of their ideas. Source A talks about it not being enough, and source B feels that there is an improvement and we can use Medisave for long-term diseases. So there is that slight difference in terms of content there. Okay, so how does the writing looks like? Okay, so if you can follow through, they are different in showing the role of the government in providing healthcare or the proactiveness of the government. Right, source A, it suggests that the government is not doing enough. All right, we compare both A and B, and this contradicts with source B because the government is looking at ways to make healthcare affordable, and hence both sources are different in how the government is making healthcare affordable, or the role of the Singapore government in tackling healthcare. So just now we did differences. Now let's take a look at the similarity. And you can see that similarity, again, it is about keywords as well as ideas. So one of the things that you realize as you're reading the source is about the affordability, cannot afford to get sick because of high medical cost. It talks about, again, afford. And let's find perhaps the keywords here in the other source. All right, that's one tip that we always use when we are comparing sources. And you can see that we can't, or Singaporeans are unable to get sick or unable to afford healthcare. So there is a sense of similarity here, and if you can identify that, you would have already identified the criteria. So how do we write? Okay, they are similar. Again, about Singaporeans feel that they cannot afford healthcare because it's expensive. From source A, again, you compare both A and B. So the connecting word will be different because we're talking about similar. So it's similarly, or it can be in addition, and all right, healthcare is again seen to be unaffordable by many, and both are similar in the fear that healthcare is not affordable or even accessible for all. So based on practice 1, we have done difference in content, we have done similar in content. Now the next part is to look at the purpose. So when we look at purpose, we are looking at identification of the creator as well as the outcome. Okay, and we all know that this is an opposition political party. You must understand what is an opposition party to begin with, and what it represents for Singapore society. And of course, you have the health minister, the one that is dealing with all these issues of subsidies and whether healthcare is affordable. So obviously, because they are different in terms of the creator and the source, then definitely their outcomes would be different. Okay, so now we look at the difference, and remember, if it is different in purpose, you must look at the purpose of each source because obviously their message and outcome will be definitely be different. Okay, so this is how you write it. They are different in purpose, and if you look very carefully, you must have the purpose verb, you must have the audience, you must have the message, you would have the quote, and you would have explained the source details. Okay, so always remember when we do purpose, we look at provenance. And if you look here, hence the outcome of the source will be to get Singaporeans to pressure the government to do more. So remember, when it's purpose, there will always be an outcome. So there is the creator, there is the audience, okay, there is that message, and of course the end part is the outcome. Because this is different in purpose, then you need that this is opposite. Okay, so do the purpose for source A, do the purpose for source B. Same thing here, and the final part is, of course, the outcome is instead of pressurizing the government, I want to reassure Singaporeans that government has taken actions. So always remember, it is two two paragraph because they are different. Okay, whereas in similarity later on you'll see that it is actually only one well explained purpose. All right, so moving on, we're going to look at sources C and D from practice 1. And because it is similar, we're going to start with similar in content and difference in content. So if you read both source C as well as source D, we are starting with, again, similar in content. So we're looking at keywords as well as ideas. As you read, you can see that, okay, it talks about Singapore's healthcare, all right, about the good services that it offers. At the same time, the tone of the source is really kind of positive. All right, now this is of course by a Singaporean in response to online criticism on Singapore's healthcare. So this is of course a response to that. And you can see from the second paragraph here that it does show quite positively about our healthcare. Now in source D, this is featured in an e-magazine on the Health Promotion Board website. And let's take a look. Is there anything that is similar? Singapore healthcare has high standards as the healthcare professionals undergo intensive training. So it does show that there is quality, it is certified, all right, and it has high standards. So if you had identified that as your criteria, you would be getting your marks. So how do we begin writing? Okay, you can see similar, state the common criteria from source B, quote from source. This suggests that, explain source details. So we're going to compare source C with source D. Again, because this is similar in content, the connecting word would be similarly in addition. And, all right, again, from source D, source details, this suggests that, of course, it's explaining source details. And have that justification statement. They are similar because why? They are explaining how effective as well as efficient our healthcare is. Now, the next step is to look at difference in content. Right, again, we're looking at key ideas as well as keywords. And if you realize that in the first paragraph, this particular source was comparing UK national health, and at the same time, source D also mentioned about the UK healthcare. Now, if you look at source C, it does tell you that it is quite negative. All these are negative. But if you look at source D, it does tell you that there are elements of positive. So you can see that there are difference, even though both of them are talking about the national health, but it is actually a difference. So how do you write different in content? So again, same method. State the common criteria. Make sure that you quote the correct source details. Explain it in your own words. You compare it with source D. Again, don't forget your connecting word. From source D, again, source details. This suggests that. And of course, that final statement, both are different in the standard of British healthcare. So we have done similar in content as well as different in content. So our next step is how do we write a similar in purpose? In the earlier video, if you rewind it, you can hear that we actually went through difference in purpose. So let's take a look at how we do similar in purpose. Now, so take note, if it is similar in purpose, you can summarize the purpose of the two sources as their message and outcome would be similar. So start with your stand that they are similar in purpose, right? And then you can see, identify the similarity. Okay, source D So C and D, the message was to convinced. Okay, Singaporeans' standard of healthcare is good, is high. So that's the main message. Quote from the source, explain again from the source, and similarly, quote from the source, explain source details. And the outcome of both sources, because they are similar in purpose, hence the outcome would be similar, is to get Singaporeans to appreciate the efforts made by the government and continue to support them. Alright, thank you so much for watching this video, and hopefully it has been meaningful.